During his second deployment, an IED explosion left Marcus with severe injuries and PTSD. When he finally returned home, Sarah, the girl who promised to wait for him, couldn't handle his struggles. At his welcome home party, in front of their friends and family, she called him damaged goods and walked away with his best friend. Marcus was left broken, both inside and out. But 5 years later, at their small town's Veterans Day ceremony, he returned in a way that no one could have predicted. The boy they remembered as a wounded warrior had become someone entirely different. Sarah would soon learn that fate had other plans, and Marcus's revenge would change not just her life, but the lives of everyone in their community. What happened next would leave their entire town in disbelief. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The small town of Pine Ridge was buzzing with excitement on the day of the Veterans Day ceremony. The autumn leaves painted the town square in shades of gold and crimson as people gathered around the newly built memorial. Among the crowd, whispers started to spread as a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. The door opened, and a tall, distinguished-looking man stepped out, his military medals gleaming in the morning sun. "Is that, Marcus Reynolds?" someone whispered, their voice filled with disbelief. The man who emerged bore little resemblance to the broken soldier who had left Pine Ridge 5 years ago. His shoulders were broad and confident, his stride purposeful, and his presence commanded attention. The scars on his face, once a source of shame, now seemed to add to his strength. He wore an impeccably tailored suit, and the slight limp in his walk was barely noticeable. As Marcus made his way through the crowd, people parted like waves. Some tried to catch his eye, while others looked away, guilt written across their faces. They all remembered that day at the welcome home party, the day everything fell apart. Standing near the podium was Rachel Martinez, the only friend who had stood by Marcus during his darkest days. She was now a successful physical therapist at the Veterans Hospital, and her face lit up when she saw him. "Marcus," she called out softly, moving to greet him with a warm hug. The crowd watched as they embraced, many noticing how different Marcus looked from the last time they'd seen him. Gone was the haunted look in his eyes, replaced by a quiet determination that seemed to radiate from within. "Where is she?" Marcus asked Rachel, his voice calm but firm. Rachel hesitated, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Sarah's supposed to be here. She's organizing the ceremony this year. Her father's the mayor now, remember?" Marcus nodded slowly, a slight smile playing at the corner of his lips. He had known this, of course. He knew everything about how things had changed in Pine Ridge over the past 5 years. How Sarah had landed a prestigious job at her father's real estate company, how she had become engaged to Tom, Marcus's former best friend, and how they had become the town's golden couple. The ceremony was about to begin, and people were taking their seats. Marcus was scheduled to be the keynote speaker, something that had caused quite a stir when it was announced. Nobody had heard from him since he left town 5 years ago, and his return had sparked endless speculation. Just then, a commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. Sarah Bradford hurried in, looking flustered. She wore an expensive designer dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled, but there was tension in her movements. She was checking her phone, barking orders at volunteers, every bit the person in charge, until she looked up and saw Marcus. The phone slipped from her hand, clattering on the ground. The color drained from her face as their eyes met across the square. Marcus held her gaze steadily, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. 5 years ago, at his welcome home party, she had stood in front of everyone they knew and said she couldn't be with someone so broken. "I can't fix you, Marcus," she had said, her voice dripping with pity and disgust. "You're not the same person anymore. You're just damaged goods." That night, as he watched her leave with Tom, something inside Marcus had shattered, but that breaking had led to his rebuilding, and now he was back, not for forgiveness, but for something else entirely. The crowd watched the silent exchange, the air thick with tension. Sarah was the first to look away, her hands shaking as she smoothed her dress. She whispered something to one of the volunteers and quickly made her way to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "welcome to Pine Ridge's annual Veterans Day ceremony. We have a special guest speaker today." As Sarah continued with her introduction, Marcus sat quietly, his expression unreadable. Rachel squeezed his hand supportively, but she couldn't help wondering what he had planned. The Marcus she knew had always been kind and forgiving, even after everything that happened. But the man sitting beside her now was different. Stronger, more determined, and carrying a presence that seemed to fill the entire square. What no one in the crowd knew, not even Rachel, was that Marcus hadn't come back just to give a speech. He had spent the last 5 years building something that would change everything, not just for Sarah, but for the entire town of Pine Ridge. His revenge, if you could call it that, would be something no one would ever expect. As Marcus stood to approach the podium, the whispers in the crowd grew louder. The way he carried himself was so different from the broken soldier they remembered. His tailored suit couldn't fully hide the military bearing that still marked his movements, and the morning sunlight caught the edge of a scar that ran along his jawline, a permanent reminder of that fateful day in Afghanistan. Sarah stepped back from the podium, nearly stumbling in her haste to create distance between them. Her perfectly manicured hands trembled as she clutched her note cards, and for a brief moment, their shoulders brushed. The touch seemed to freeze her in place, and Marcus caught a whiff of her expensive perfume, the same brand she used to wear when they were together. "Thank you, Ms. Bradford," he said, his voice carrying easily across the square. The formal address wasn't lost on anyone. This was the same woman he had once planned to marry, the one who had promised to love him through everything. The crowd sat in rapt attention as Marcus adjusted the microphone. Among them, Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his arm around Sarah's empty chair. He had gained weight since high school, his former football player's build now softer around the edges. His eyes darted nervously between Sarah and Marcus, as if trying to gauge what might happen next. "5 years ago," Marcus began, his voice steady and strong, "I came home to Pine Ridge a different man than the one who left. I had seen things, experienced things, that changed me forever." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. Some people couldn't handle those changes. They saw only what was broken, what was lost. Sarah sank into her seat, her face pale. Rachel watched her former friend's discomfort with a mixture of satisfaction and pity. She remembered all too well how Sarah had abandoned Marcus when he needed her most, how she had spread rumors about his instability to justify her actions. "But today," Marcus continued, "I'm not here to talk about the past. I'm here to talk about the future." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Mayor Bradford, if you would join me up here, please." Sarah's father, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, rose from his seat in the front row. He looked confused but maintained his political smile as he walked to the podium. Like many in town, he had chosen to overlook how his daughter had treated a wounded veteran, focusing instead on maintaining their family's pristine image. "Sir," Marcus said, handing him the paper, "this is the deed to the old Miller factory on the edge of town. I've purchased it through my company, Warriors Rise Industries." A murmur ran through the crowd. The Miller factory had been Pine Ridge's largest employer before it shut down 3 years ago, leaving hundreds without jobs. Its closure had hit the town hard, and many families were still struggling to recover. "As of today," Marcus announced, his voice growing stronger, "we're reopening the factory, but not just as a manufacturing plant. We're converting it into a state-of-the-art rehabilitation and job training center for veterans." The crowd erupted in gasps and excited whispers. Sarah's father unfolded the paper with shaking hands, his eyes widening as he read the details. "My company has already secured federal contracts and private partnerships. We'll be providing employment for at least 300 people, with priority given to local residents and veterans." Marcus paused, allowing his words to sink in. "Every veteran deserves a chance to rebuild their life, to find purpose again, Cabine. even when others, Ariav, have given up on them. Rachel felt tears welling up in her eyes. This was why Marcus had disappeared for 5 years, not to plot some petty revenge, but to create something meaningful from his pain. She watched, as Sarah seemed to shrink in her seat, the full weight of her past actions clearly hitting her. And there's more, Marcus continued. The center will include a full medical wing specializing in physical therapy and PTSD treatment. We've partnered with several major hospitals, and I'm pleased to announce that Dr. Rachel Martinez has agreed to serve as our head of rehabilitation services. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth in shock. They had discussed her possibly consulting for his company, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. Around her, people were turning in their seats, some smiling, others looking envious. Tom had gone completely pale, probably realizing that the small real estate agency he ran with Sarah would no longer be the town's biggest employer. Their planned development project for the old factory site, luxury condos that few in town could afford, would never happen now. "This is just the beginning," Marcus said, his voice filled with quiet authority. "Pine Ridge was my home once, and despite everything that happened here, I believe in this community. Sometimes the deepest wounds can lead us to our greatest purpose, if we're brave enough to face them." As he finished speaking, the crowd erupted in applause. Veterans in attendance stood up first, followed by their families, until nearly everyone was on their feet. Everyone except Sarah, who remained seated, tears streaming down her face as she watched her carefully constructed world begin to shift beneath her feet. Marcus stepped back from the podium, nodding once to Mayor Bradford, who was still staring at the deed in disbelief. As he walked back to his seat, Rachel reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. The broken soldier she had helped piece back together hadn't just survived, he had become something extraordinary. But this was just the beginning. No one in Pine Ridge, not even Rachel, knew the full extent of what Marcus had planned. His revenge wouldn't be served cold. It would be served with purpose, with dignity, and with a power that none of them could have imagined. The reception following the ceremony buzzed with excitement and nervous energy. The town hall's grand meeting room was filled with people discussing Marcus's announcement, their voices a mix of awe and speculation. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a warm glow on the gathered crowd as servers weaved through with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Marcus stood near the tall windows, accepting congratulations and fielding questions about the rehabilitation center with quiet confidence. Rachel watched from across the room as several local business owners practically tripped over themselves trying to get his attention. It was a stark contrast to 5 years ago, when these same people had avoided him like he was contagious. Sarah hovered near the refreshment table, trying to maintain her composure while stealing glances at Marcus. Her father, Mayor Bradford, was deep in conversation with Marcus's team of advisors, his earlier shock now replaced with eager enthusiasm. The promise of 300 new jobs before the next election was a political goldmine. "Marcus," Tom's voice cut through the crowd as he approached, his face flushed from too much champagne. "Can we talk? In private?" Rachel tensed, ready to intervene, but Marcus gave her a subtle nod. He followed Tom to a quieter corner of the room, his posture relaxed but alert, the stance of a soldier who never truly leaves the battlefield behind. "Look," Tom began, his voice lowered but urgent. "About what happened 5 years ago. I know I was a terrible friend. Sarah was vulnerable and Was she vulnerable when you two started seeing each other behind my back while I was deployed?" Marcus's voice remained calm, but his words cut like steel. 3 months before the IED, Rachel found the old text messages. Tom's face went white. We didn't." "Save it," Marcus interrupted. "I'm not here for apologies or explanations. The past is the past. But you should know. The Bradford Development Group's proposal for the factory site? I've seen the numbers. You're underwater, aren't you? The investors are pulling out?" Tom swallowed hard, his earlier bravado evaporating. The rumors were true. Their company was in trouble. Sarah's father had leveraged everything on the luxury condo project, convinced that his political connections would secure the factory site at a bargain price. "We could work something out," Tom offered desperately. "A partnership, maybe?" Sarah's father has connections. "I'm not interested in partnerships," Marcus replied. "But I am planning to acquire some distressed properties in town. The old Bradford building on Main Street, for instance. I hear it's about to go into foreclosure." Tom's hands began to shake. The Bradford building was Sarah's pride and joy, her first solo development project. But like many of their recent ventures, it was built on loans and promises rather than solid funding. Across the room, Sarah watched their interaction with growing anxiety. She had spent years crafting her image as the town's golden girl, but it was all starting to unravel. The whispers had already started about their company's financial troubles, and now Marcus, the man she had so cruelly dismissed, had returned as a successful businessman with the power to destroy everything she had built. Rachel approached Sarah, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. "Quite a day, isn't it?" she said, offering one to her former friend. Sarah accepted the glass gratefully, her designer bracelet clinking against the crystal. "Rachel, I know what you must think of me." "I try not to think of you at all," Rachel replied coolly. "But you should know that Marcus hired me 6 months ago as a consultant. I've seen what he's built, Sarah. It's incredible. While you and Tom were playing small-town royalty, he was creating something that will help thousands of veterans." Sarah's hand trembled as she set down her untouched champagne. Does he ever talk about what happened? About me?" Rachel's expression softened slightly. "He doesn't need to. His actions speak for themselves. You saw him as broken, but his broken pieces built an empire." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. A group of people was entering the hall, men and women of various ages, some in wheelchairs, others walking with canes or prosthetic limbs. They were veterans, dozens of them, all wearing pins with the Warriors Rise Industries logo. Marcus moved to greet them, and the change in his demeanor was immediate. Gone was the cold business exterior, replaced by genuine warmth. These were his real people, wounded warriors who had faced the same battles he had. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the room, his voice carrying with natural authority, "I'd like you to meet the first group of veterans who will be joining our program. They're not just going to be employees. They're going to be partners in everything we build here." The room erupted in applause, but Sarah felt her world spinning. Among the group of veterans, she recognized a face, her younger brother Ryan, who had enlisted right after high school and returned from his first tour with PTSD, just like Marcus, the brother she had quietly distanced herself from, afraid his struggles would taint her perfect image. Ryan walked straight to Marcus, greeting him with a brotherly hug. The 2 men had obviously met before, had probably been planning this moment for months. Sarah watched as her brother smiled. Really smiled, for the first time since his return from deployment. The revenge Marcus had planned wasn't just about business or money. It was about showing Sarah, Tom, and everyone else in Pine Ridge what they had failed to see 5 years ago. That sometimes the deepest wounds create the strongest warriors, and that true strength lies not in avoiding brokenness, but in helping others rebuild from it. As the afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor, it was clear to everyone that this was just the beginning. Marcus Reynolds hadn't come back to Pine Ridge to destroy anyone. He had come back to build something far more powerful than revenge. The weeks following the Veterans Day ceremony brought dramatic changes to Pine Ridge. Construction crews descended on the old Miller factory, transforming the abandoned building into a modern facility. The town buzzed with energy as new businesses began opening in anticipation of the center's launch. But beneath the excitement, tensions were building. Sarah sat in her office at Bradford Development Group, staring at a stack of foreclosure notices. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across her desk, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes. Her perfect world was crumbling faster than she could prop it up. 3 major investors had pulled out of their projects after Marcus's announcement, and the bank was calling in loans. A knock on her door made her jump. Sarah! It was Ryan, her brother, looking healthier and more confident than she had seen him in years. He wore a Warriors Rise Industries polo shirt, the company logo gleaming on his chest. "What are you doing here?" she asked, quickly trying to hide the foreclosure papers. "Marcus sent me," Ryan replied, stepping into the office. "He wants to talk to you, both you and Tom, today at the new center." Sarah's heart raced. Since the ceremony, she had been avoiding any direct contact with Marcus, even as his influence in town grew stronger. "Why?" "Because," Ryan said, his voice firm but kind, "sometimes facing our mistakes is the first step to fixing them." He paused, looking around the office. "You know, when I came back from deployment, I was just like Marcus, lost, struggling, feeling broken. But while you were ashamed of me, he was the one who reached out. He found me in that veterans support group in the city." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. "Ryan, I never meant to—" "Yes, you did," he interrupted gently. "You meant to protect your perfect image just like you did with Marcus, but here's the thing, sis. Real strength isn't about looking perfect. It's about being brave enough to face your own brokenness." An hour later, Sarah and Tom stood in the entrance of the newly renovated rehabilitation center. The transformation was stunning. The old factory's industrial bones had been preserved but modernized, with huge windows letting in natural light and state-of-the-art equipment visible in every direction. Rachel greeted them in the lobby, her professional demeanor masking any personal feelings. "Follow me," she said simply, leading them through the facility. They passed training rooms where veterans were learning new skills, a medical wing with cutting-edge rehabilitation equipment, and common areas designed to foster community and healing. Everything spoke of purpose and hope, exactly what Marcus had lost in this town 5 years ago. Finally, they reached Marcus's office. He sat behind a sleek desk, the wall behind him covered with photographs, not of himself, but of veterans who had gone through his program in other cities. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see the town of Pine Ridge spread out below. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said, gesturing for them to sit. "I imagine you know why you're here." Tom started to speak, but Marcus held up his hand. "Before you say anything, I want to show you something." He pressed a button on his desk, and a large screen on the wall came to life, displaying financial projections and property values. "Your company is 3 months away from complete collapse," Marcus stated matter-of-factly. "The Bradford building will be the first to go, followed by your other properties. When that happens, it won't just be you who suffers. 37 families in this town will lose their jobs." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Why are you showing us this?" "Because," Marcus leaned forward, his eyes intense, "I'm offering you a choice. Not a rescue. You don't deserve that. But a chance to be part of something bigger than yourselves." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were papers detailing a proposed partnership. Not with Bradford Development Group, but with a new nonprofit organization focused on providing housing and support services for veterans' families. "You have skills this town needs," Marcus continued, "but you've been using them wrong. This program will acquire and renovate properties throughout Pine Ridge, creating affordable housing for veterans and their families. It won't make you rich, but it will save your employees' jobs and give you a chance to rebuild your reputation the right way." Tom stared at the papers, his hands shaking slightly. "Why would you help us after everything we did?" Marcus stood and walked to the window. "Because this was never about revenge. It's about transformation, not just for the veterans we help, but for this entire community. Sometimes the people who have caused the most pain need the most help to change." He turned back to face them. "You have 24 hours to decide. If you accept, you'll work under Rachel's supervision. Every decision, every project will need her approval. If you refuse—" He shrugged. Well, the market will take its course. Sarah looked at the photographs on the wall, really seeing them for the first time. Each one showed a veteran with their family, smiling, healing, building a new life. In one corner, she spotted a recent addition, a picture of her brother Ryan, standing proud in his Warriors Rise uniform. 5 years ago, Marcus said softly, "You called me damaged goods. You were right in a way. We're all damaged by the things we've been through, but damage doesn't make us worthless. It makes us human. The question is, what will you build from your broken pieces?" As Sarah and Tom left the office that afternoon, the sun was setting over Pine Ridge, casting long shadows across the town they had once thought they owned. They had 24 hours to decide their fate, but in reality the choice was already clear. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's forcing them to become better people. The decision Sarah and Tom made that day set in motion a chain of events that would reshape not just their lives, but the entire fabric of Pine Ridge. As autumn turned to winter, the transformation of the old Miller factory neared completion, and with it, the transformation of two people who had once caused so much pain. Sarah stood in the rain at a construction site, her designer heels replaced by work boots, her perfectly styled hair tucked under a hard hat. She was supervising the renovation of what would become transitional housing for veterans' families. Rachel stood beside her, reviewing the plans with a critical eye. "The accessibility modifications for the ground floor units need to be adjusted," Rachel pointed out, her tone professional but firm. "Remember what Marcus always says. Every detail matters," Sarah finished quietly. Over the past few months, she had learned this lesson well. Each decision, no matter how small, could impact a veteran's ability to rebuild their life. Across town, Tom was leading a team of veterans in renovating the Bradford building. The luxury offices they had once planned were being converted into a community center and job training facility. He worked alongside the men and women he had once viewed with discomfort, learning their stories, understanding their struggles. Marcus watched these changes from his office at the rehabilitation center, but his mind was on bigger plans. The success in Pine Ridge had caught national attention, and offers were coming in from cities across the country wanting to replicate the program. "You should see this," Rachel said, walking into his office with a tablet in hand. She pulled up a local news website where Sarah's latest blog post had gone viral. In it, Sarah had publicly apologized for her past actions and shared the lessons she'd learned about judgment, compassion, and the true meaning of strength. "She's changed," Rachel observed, studying Marcus's reaction carefully. Marcus nodded slowly. "We all have." He stood and walked to the window, watching as a group of veterans arrived for their morning training session. Among them was Ryan, now a mentor in the program, helping newly arrived veterans adjust to civilian life. "The Pentagon called again," Marcus continued. "They want to implement our program at major military hospitals. They're offering full funding and support." Rachel's eyes widened. "That would mean thousands of veterans could get help before they even leave the service," Marcus finished. "But it would mean leaving Pine Ridge, at least for a while." The thought hung heavy in the air. Pine Ridge had been their testing ground, the place where pain had been transformed into purpose. Leaving now, when everything was finally coming together, felt strange. A knock at the door interrupted their thoughts. It was Sarah, still in her construction gear, looking nervous but determined. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to see." She led them to the community center where dozens of people had gathered. Veterans from the program stood alongside townspeople, former employees of the Miller factory next to new staff members. Tom was there too, standing with Ryan. "What's this about?" Marcus asked, taking in the scene. Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "When you came back to Pine Ridge, you showed us that true strength isn't about power or revenge. It's about building something meaningful from our broken pieces. We've all learned that lesson, and now it's our turn to build something." She gestured to a large display board where plans were laid out for an expansion of the program. The local business community had pledged support, The town council had approved zoning changes, and families had offered to host veterans during their transition. Pine Ridge isn't just your testing ground anymore, Sarah continued. It's become a model of what's possible when a community comes together to help its warriors heal. We want to continue this work, to expand it, even if your next mission takes you elsewhere. Marcus looked around the room, seeing the determination in every face. These were the same people who had once turned their backs on him, who had seen only his brokenness. Now they were standing together, committed to helping others heal. 5 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the quiet room, I came back to this town broken in body and spirit. I thought I wanted revenge, but what I really needed was purpose. What we've built here isn't just about helping veterans, it's about showing that every broken piece can become part of something beautiful. He turned to Sarah, seeing not the girl who had humiliated him, but a woman who had found her own path to redemption. The program will grow, here and across the country, but Pine Ridge will always be where it started, where we all learned that the greatest victory isn't in destroying what hurt us, but in building something stronger from the ruins. As the room erupted in applause, Marcus caught Rachel's eye. She was smiling, understanding as she always had that his journey had never really been about revenge. It had been about proving that sometimes the deepest wounds can lead to the most powerful healing. The spring sunshine bathed Pine Ridge in golden light as Marcus stood on the podium once again. But this time, the crowd before him was different. 1 year had passed since the Veterans Day ceremony that had changed everything. The rehabilitation center was now a thriving hub of activity, and the town had become a nationwide model for veteran support and community transformation. Today was the graduation ceremony for the first full class of veterans who had completed the Warriors Rise program in Pine Ridge. Rows of chairs filled the center's courtyard, where families and friends gathered to celebrate. The graduates sat in front, wearing navy blue blazers with the Warriors Rise logo, a phoenix rising from ashes. When I started this program, Marcus began, his voice strong and clear. Someone asked me why I chose to come back to Pine Ridge. They thought I was seeking revenge, trying to prove something to the people who had hurt me. He paused, looking out at the faces before him. In the front row, Rachel sat next to Ryan, who was now the program's lead peer counselor. A few rows back, Sarah and Tom were there too, but they were different people now. Sarah had traded her designer clothes for practical business attire, her face showing the quiet confidence of someone who had found her true purpose. Tom had lost weight and gained humility, working tirelessly alongside the veterans he once avoided. But the truth is, Marcus continued, sometimes the path to healing leads us right back to where we were broken. Each of you graduating today knows this. You've faced your own battles, carried your own scars, but you've proven that those scars don't define you. They refine you. He gestured to the rehabilitation center behind him, its walls now covered in murals painted by veteran artists. This center stands as proof that purpose can rise from pain. But the real transformation isn't in these buildings. It's in each of you, and in this community that has learned to see strength in what was once considered broken. The ceremony proceeded as each graduate received their completion certificate and shared their story. There were tears and laughter, moments of profound silence and bursts of applause. These weren't just success stories. They were testimonies of resilience, of lives rebuilt from the ground up. After the ceremony, during the reception, Sarah approached Marcus. She had waited for this moment, knowing what she needed to say. The Pentagon called about the national expansion, she said, her voice steady. Rachel told me you're leaving next week. Marcus nodded. The program needs to grow. There are too many veterans waiting for help. I know, Sarah replied. But before you go, I need you to hear something. She took a deep breath. 5 years ago, I thought I was rejecting someone who was broken, but I was the one who was broken, too shallow to see real strength, too afraid to face my own weaknesses. Marcus watched her carefully, seeing the genuine change in her eyes. We all have our battles, Sarah. The important thing is learning to fight them with honor. "You taught me that," she said softly. "Not through revenge or punishment, but by showing me a better way to live. I'll never forget that." As they talked, Rachel watched from across the courtyard, remembering the broken soldier who had come to her physical therapy clinic 5 years ago. Marcus had been determined then, pushing through his rehabilitation with a focus that seemed almost obsessive. Now, she understood. He had been building himself back up piece by piece, preparing for something bigger than revenge. The sun was setting as the graduates and their families began to leave. Marcus stood with his team, discussing the upcoming expansion. The Pentagon contract would allow them to open centers near major military hospitals across the country. Pine Ridge would remain their flagship location, a testament to what was possible when healing became a community mission. "You know," Rachel said, joining him as the last guests departed, "when you first told me about your plan to come back here, I thought you were making a mistake. I thought facing your past would only bring more pain." Marcus smiled, looking out over the town that had once rejected him. "Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in running from our pain. It's in transforming it into something meaningful." In the distance, the lights of Pine Ridge began to twinkle in the gathering dusk. The old Miller factory, once a symbol of the town's decline, now shone as a beacon of hope. The Bradford building, transformed into a community center, hosted weekly support groups and job training sessions. Even the small coffee shop where Sarah had once broken up with Marcus was now a gathering place for veterans and townspeople alike. "The real revenge," Marcus said quietly, "wasn't in proving them wrong. It was in proving that they could be better, that we all could be better." As night fell over Pine Ridge, the graduation decorations still fluttering in the evening breeze, it was clear that this story of revenge had become something far more powerful, a testament to the strength that comes not from destroying what hurt us, but from building something beautiful from the broken pieces. The news of Marcus's imminent departure spread through Pine Ridge like wildfire. 5 days before he was scheduled to leave for Washington, D.C., the town council organized a special gathering at the community center. What started as a simple farewell ceremony turned into something much more significant. The main hall of the former Bradford building was packed with people from all walks of life. Veterans in their Warriors Rise blazers mingled with townspeople. Local business owners chatted with program graduates. And in one corner, Sarah's father, the mayor, was deep in conversation with military officials who had flown in for the occasion. Marcus stood near the entrance, watching the scene unfold. Rachel approached him, holding a thick folder. "The latest statistics from our first year," she said, handing it to him. 97% employment rate among graduates, 0 homelessness, and significant improvements in PTSD symptoms across the board. The medical journal is publishing the study next month. Before Marcus could respond, Ryan appeared with an elderly man, someone Marcus recognized immediately. It was James Miller, the former owner of the factory that had become their rehabilitation center. "Mr. Miller," Marcus greeted him, extending his hand. "I didn't know you were back in town." The old man's eyes were moist as he gripped Marcus's hand. "Had to come see for myself," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This factory was in my family. For 3 generations, when we had to close it, I thought that was the end of its story. But you've given it new life, son. A better purpose than we ever imagined." As they talked, Sarah watched from across the room. She stood with Tom near the wall of photographs that documented the center's journey. The latest addition was a series of before and after shots. The abandoned factory transformed into the rehabilitation center, the Bradford building's evolution from luxury offices to community space, and most powerfully, the faces of veterans who had found new purpose through the program. "Remember when we thought we were the ones who had it all figured out?" Tom said quietly, studying the photos. "We were so wrong." Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on a particular image, the day they had signed the partnership agreement with Warriors Rise. In the photo, she and Tom stood with Marcus and Rachel, all 4 holding the document that would change their lives. "We were lucky," she replied. "He could have destroyed us. Instead, he showed us how to rebuild ourselves." The mayor called for everyone's attention, tapping his glass for silence. "Today," he began, "we gather not just to bid farewell to Marcus Reynolds, but to celebrate a transformation that none of us could have predicted." He gestured to a large screen where images began to play. The town before and after Warriors Rise, the lives changed, the community rebuilt. When Marcus returned to Pine Ridge, many of us feared he came seeking revenge. We were wrong. He came bearing something far more powerful: the gift of purpose. The mayor turned to Marcus. "The town council has unanimously voted to establish the Reynolds Foundation for veteran support. We're dedicating 1% of our annual budget to continuing and expanding the work you've started here." Applause erupted, but the mayor wasn't finished. "Furthermore, we're renaming the Rehabilitation Center. From today forward, it will be known as the Phoenix Center for Veteran Renewal. A reminder that from the ashes of pain, new life can rise." Marcus stood, momentarily speechless. Rachel squeezed his arm supportively as he made his way to the podium. Looking out at the gathered faces, he saw his journey come full circle. The town that had once broken him had become the foundation of something extraordinary. "5 years ago," he began, his voice steady, "I left Pine Ridge carrying deep wounds, not just from war, but from rejection and betrayal. I thought I wanted revenge. I thought proving my success would somehow heal those wounds." He paused, looking at Sarah and Tom, at Ryan, at all the faces that had been part of his story. "But what I discovered was something far more powerful. True healing doesn't come from proving others wrong. It comes from proving that change is possible, that broken things can become beautiful, that purpose is stronger than pain." As Marcus continued speaking, Sarah felt tears rolling down her cheeks. She remembered the cruel words she had spoken at his welcome home party, the way she had dismissed his struggles, the pain she had caused. But here he stood, having turned that pain into a force for good that would ripple out far beyond their small town. "The work we've done here in Pine Ridge isn't just about helping veterans," Marcus concluded. "It's about showing that every community has the power to transform itself, that every person, no matter how broken they may feel, has value and purpose. As I leave for Washington, I go knowing that Pine Ridge isn't just my hometown anymore. It's proof that the deepest wounds can lead to the most profound healing." The applause that followed was deafening, but it was the silent tears on many faces that truly told the story. This wasn't just a farewell to a successful businessman or a thank you to a benefactor. It was a recognition that sometimes the greatest acts of revenge are not acts of destruction, but of creation. Not in tearing down those who hurt us, but in building something so beautiful that it transforms them too. The morning of Marcus's departure dawned bright and clear. The small Pine Ridge airport, usually quiet at this hour, was buzzing with activity. His private jet waited on the tarmac, the Warriors Rise logo gleaming on its tail. But before heading to Washington, Marcus had one final stop to make. He drove his SUV through the familiar streets, past the rehabilitation center where early morning activities were already beginning, past the community center where a group of veterans was gathering for their morning meeting. Finally, he pulled up to a small cemetery on the outskirts of town. Rachel was waiting for him there, standing beside a well-maintained grave. As Marcus approached, she stepped back, giving him space. The headstone read, "Sergeant Michael Reynolds, beloved brother and son. Forever a hero." "I haven't been here since the funeral," Marcus said quietly, kneeling to place a small medallion, a Warriors Rise phoenix, at the base of the stone. He would have been 35 today. Rachel nodded, remembering the story Marcus had shared during their first therapy session. His older brother had been killed in action 2 years before Marcus enlisted. It was Michael's death that had inspired Marcus to join the Marines, and Michael's memory that had helped him survive his darkest days. "Everything we've built here," Marcus continued, "it all started with him. He always said that the true measure of a soldier isn't in how many battles they win, but in how many lives they save." As they stood there in the morning silence, a car pulled up to the cemetery. Sarah stepped out, holding a bouquet of flowers. She hesitated, clearly unsure if she should intrude on this private moment. It's okay, Marcus called out. Come join us. Sarah approached slowly, her heels sinking slightly into the damp grass. She laid the flowers beside Marcus's medallion. I remember Michael, she said softly. He was always kind to everyone in school, even the kids others ignored. I never understood until now how much he influenced you. Marcus stood, brushing dirt from his knees. When I was at my lowest point, after the IED, after everything that happened here, I kept thinking about what Michael would do. He wouldn't have sought revenge. He would have found a way to help others heal. The morning sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the gravestones. In the distance, they could hear the town coming to life. Cars heading to work, the rehabilitation center's morning bell, the sound of construction at their newest project site. The Pentagon briefing is at 2, Rachel reminded him gently. We should head to the airport. As they drove back through town, Pine Ridge seemed different somehow. The streets that had once held so much pain for Marcus now told a different story. Every corner marked a point of transformation, not just of the town, but of the people who called it home. At the airport, a small crowd had gathered to say goodbye. Ryan stood with his veteran mentoring group, all in their Warriors Rise uniforms. Tom was there with the community center staff. The mayor and several council members waited near the terminal. Even old Mr. Miller had come to see Marcus off. Sarah stepped forward as Marcus prepared to board. I've been trying to find the right words, she said, her voice thick with emotion. How do you thank someone for showing you a better way to live? Marcus looked at her thoughtfully. You don't need to thank me, Sarah. Just keep building. Keep helping others find their way back from their broken places. As he turned to board the plane, Sarah called out one last time. Was any of it about revenge, even in the beginning? Marcus paused on the steps, looking back at the gathered crowd, at the town beyond, at the life he had built from his pain. Maybe at first, he admitted. But somewhere along the way, I realized that the best revenge isn't in making others suffer. It's in showing them a better way to live. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who need the most help to change. Rachel followed him onto the plane, taking her seat as his chief operations officer for the national expansion. As they taxied down the runway, Marcus looked out the window at Pine Ridge growing smaller below them. The rehabilitation center stood proud against the morning sky, its new name, the Phoenix Center for Veteran Renewal, catching the sunlight. 5 years ago, he had left this town broken and angry, dreaming of revenge. Now he was leaving again, but this time he was leaving something behind, a legacy of healing, a community transformed, and a powerful reminder that the strongest form of revenge isn't in destroying what hurt you, but in building something so beautiful that it transforms everyone it touches. As the plane lifted into the clouds, Marcus thought about all the other towns, all the other veterans waiting for help. His journey had started with pain and a desire for revenge, but it had become something far more powerful, a mission to show that every broken piece, every painful memory, every dark moment could become part of something greater. The story of Marcus Reynolds and Pine Ridge would be told many times in the years to come, not as a tale of revenge, but as proof that sometimes the deepest wounds can lead to the most profound healing, and that true strength lies not in tearing others down, but in building them up alongside you. 5 years had passed since Marcus left Pine Ridge for Washington. The small town had become a national model for veteran rehabilitation, with delegations from across the country visiting the Phoenix Center to learn from their success. But today was special. Marcus was finally coming home. The autumn air was crisp as his private jet touched down at Pine Ridge Airport. Through the window, he could see the changes in his hometown. New buildings dotted the skyline. The rehabilitation center had expanded to 3 times its original size, and the town bustled with an energy it hadn't had in decades. Rachel stood waiting on the tarmac, her dark hair now streaked with elegant strands of silver. Beside her was Ryan, now the executive director of the Phoenix Center, and a group of staff members and veterans. As Marcus descended the steps, the familiar Pine Ridge air filled his lungs. "Welcome home, stranger Yai," Rachel said, embracing him warmly. You picked quite a day to return." Marcus smiled, knowing exactly what she meant. Today marked the 10th anniversary of his initial return to Pine Ridge, the day that had started everything. The town was hosting a special ceremony to commemorate a decade of transformation. "How many centers are we up to now?" Ryan asked as they drove through town. 52 across the country," Marcus replied, watching the familiar streets pass by. "The new one in Seattle opens next month, but Pine Ridge will always be special. This is where it all began." They pulled up to the Phoenix Center, where a large crowd had already gathered. The facility had grown into a sprawling campus with modern buildings surrounding the original converted factory. A new sign caught Marcus's eye. The Sarah Bradford Memorial Garden. "She insisted we didn't name it after her," Rachel explained, following his gaze. "But after she passed away last year, the veterans she had helped voted unanimously. The garden was her favorite project." Marcus nodded solemnly. Sarah had spent her final years dedicated to the center, working tirelessly to help veteran families find homes and rebuild their lives. Her transformation from the girl who had once caused him so much pain to a beacon of hope for others had been complete. The ceremony was being held in the main courtyard. Tom was there, now remarried and running the center's housing program. Mayor Bradford, Sarah's father, sat in the front row, older but still proud. Faces familiar and new filled the seats. Veterans, family members, townspeople. All part of the legacy that had grown from one man's journey from revenge to purpose. As Marcus took the podium, he looked out at the gathered crowd. 10 years ago, he began. "I stood in this town with anger in my heart and thoughts of revenge in my mind. I wanted to show everyone who had hurt me just how wrong they had been." He paused, letting his words sink in. But life has a way of transforming our darkest intentions into something greater. What started as a desire for revenge became a mission of renewal. What began as one man's pain became a community's healing. The crowd listened intently as Marcus continued. "In the past decade, over 10,000 veterans have found new purpose through our programs. Countless families have been rebuilt. Communities have been transformed. And it all started here, in Pine Ridge, where a broken soldier learned that the greatest victory isn't in destroying what hurt you, but in building something better from the ruins." After the ceremony, Marcus walked through the Sarah Bradford Memorial Garden. The paths were lined with plaques sharing stories of veterans who had found healing there. In the center stood a small fountain with words etched around its base. "From our deepest wounds come our greatest purpose." Rachel joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "So," she said, handing him one, "are you really staying this time?" Marcus nodded. "The national program is running smoothly. It's time to come home, to focus on where it all began." He looked around at the center, at the town beyond. "Pine Ridge still has so much to teach us about transformation." As the sun set over the Phoenix Center, casting long shadows across the garden, Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him here. The broken soldier who had returned seeking revenge had found something far more powerful, the ability to transform pain into purpose, not just for himself, but for thousands of others. Tom approached them, holding a framed photograph. It showed the original group, Marcus, Rachel, Sarah, and Tom, standing in front of the abandoned factory 10 years ago. "Found this while cleaning out the old files," he said. "We were different people then." Marcus took the photo, studying the faces frozen in time. "We all were," he said quietly. "But that's the point, isn't it? True healing isn't about staying the same or getting revenge. It's about becoming something better than you were before." As night fell over Pine Ridge, the Phoenix Center's lights illuminated the darkness like a beacon. In offices and training rooms, veterans continued their journey of healing. In the Memorial Garden, families walked the paths, reading stories of transformation. And in the heart of it all, a man who had once sought revenge stood surrounded by the legacy of choosing a different path. The story of Marcus Reynolds and Pine Ridge had become more than a tale of revenge transformed. It had become a testament to the power of purpose over pain, of renewal over retribution, of the incredible things that can grow from the soil of our deepest wounds. Would you like me to continue with Part 10? Later that night, after most people had left the anniversary celebration, Marcus stood alone on the roof of the Phoenix Center. The lights of Pine Ridge twinkled below him like fallen stars, and the autumn wind carried the faint scent of change in the air. Rachel found him there, just as she had found him so many times over the years when he needed space to think. She handed him a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. "Sarah left this for you," she said softly. "In her final days, she asked me to give it to you when the time was right." Marcus carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a leather-bound journal and an envelope. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the letter. "Dear Marcus, if you're reading this, I'm no longer here to say these words in person, but they need to be said. 10 years ago, you taught me the most powerful lesson about revenge, that sometimes the greatest vengeance isn't in destroying those who hurt you, but in transforming them through your own growth. I was cruel to you. I rejected you when you needed support the most. I thought I was protecting myself from your brokenness, never realizing that I was the one who was truly broken. But instead of destroying me when you had the chance, you showed me a better way to live. In this journal, I've documented every story of every veteran family we've helped over the years. Each page represents a life transformed, a family rebuilt, a future reclaimed. This is your real legacy, Marcus. Not revenge, but renewal. Thank you for showing me that our deepest wounds can become our greatest purpose. With eternal gratitude, Sarah." Marcus wiped his eyes as he flipped through the journal. Pages upon pages of photographs, stories, and notes documented the journey they had all taken together. The last entry was dated just days before Sarah's passing, describing a young veteran who had finally found his way home. "She spent her final days writing in that journal," Rachel said quietly. "She wanted to make sure every story was preserved." Just then they heard footsteps on the stairs. It was Ryan, followed by Tom and several veterans from the program. They too had sensed that this moment needed to be shared. "You know," Ryan said, looking out over the town, "when I first came home from deployment, I thought my life was over. I was lost, just like you were, Marcus. But what you built here, it didn't just save my life. It showed all of us that our scars don't define us. They refine us." Marcus closed Sarah's journal gently. 10 years ago, I thought coming back to Pine Ridge would be my revenge. I wanted to show everyone who had hurt me that they were wrong. But life had bigger plans." He walked to the edge of the roof, looking out at the town that had transformed alongside him. The old Miller factory, now the heart of the Phoenix Center. The Bradford building, a hub of community healing. The memorial garden where Sarah's legacy lived on. Each place marked a chapter in their story of transformation. "The truth is," Marcus continued, "real strength isn't found in getting even. It's found in getting better, in building something so beautiful that it transforms not just you but everyone it touches." As they stood together on that rooftop, the cool night air wrapping around them like a blanket, they were no longer the broken people they had once been. They were builders, healers, transformers, living proof that the deepest wounds can lead to the most profound purpose. The lights of Pine Ridge continued to twinkle below, each one representing a story of healing, a moment of transformation, a piece of the legacy they had built together. Marcus held Sarah's journal close to his heart, feeling the weight of all the stories it contained. "So what's next?" Rachel asked, though she already knew the answer. Marcus smiled, looking out at the town he had once left in pain but had returned to in purpose. "We keep building," he said simply. "We keep helping others transform their wounds into wisdom. We keep proving that the greatest revenge isn't in destroying what hurt us, but in building something beautiful from the broken pieces." They all finished together, their voices carrying into the night air. And so the story of Marcus Reynolds and Pine Ridge became more than a tale of revenge transformed. It became a testament to the power of purpose, a reminder that our deepest wounds can become our greatest gifts, and proof that sometimes the path to healing leads us right back to where we were broken, not to destroy but to rebuild something far more beautiful than before.